Hello and welcome to another episode of the Indie Alternative Podcast. It's me, Chris. On this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Andy, Yorke and Nigel Powell of Unbelievable Truth. It was such a treat to speak to Andy and Nigel, as Unbelievable Truth were such a big influence to my music back in the day, and they were on great form. And we get to hear about the early days of the band, how they wrote and recorded, record label shenanigans and loads of other stuff. It was a real pleasure. Just before we hit the interview, here's a quick reminder of all the ways that you can support the podcast. You can follow me on social media, and all those links are, as always, in the show notes. And if you'd like to buy me a virtual coffee to support the podcast financially, you can do that as well, and the link is in the show notes. And finally, if you haven't written a review or left a rating, if you could do that, that would be amazing. Anyway, that's it for the waffle. Here's Andy and Nigel. Welcome to the podcast, Andy, Yorke, Nigel Powell. How are you?
We are good.
Andy speaks for me.
How often do you guys sort of talk? Do you still keep in regular contact, or what's the situation?
Yes, me and Andy are still best friends. I mean, this is the moment when Andy goes, "Are we?" But
I endorse that.
Me and Andy are best friends and talk. We're geographically apart, so we don't see each other face to face all that much. But we talk regularly enough, and I'm still friends with Jace as well. And we did ask Jace if he wanted to come onto this, and he said it's fine, you guys just do it. Which I mean, back in the day, we did used to do views with all three of us, and Jace would literally just not say anything and just kind of look quite awkward about it. So he knows his own limitations in that respect. So he said, it's fine.
Do you get asked to talk about Unbelievable Truth a lot nowadays, or is it nice to sort of delve back into those times?
I don't get asked to talk about it at all, and it's very nice. Andy?
Yeah, same here. I think this is the first time I've been asked, really, for like 15 years, probably.
Uh-huh.
The memories, I have to say, have faded a bit for me, but luckily we've got Nigel here, who has kind of a photographic memory. He can tell you where we were playing on the 15th of November, 1999.
See, you're saying that, but just before we started recording there, Chris reminded me that we'd met before because his band supported Dive Dive at the Winchester Railway Inn, and I didn't remember that. So you
wouldn't remember us. We were awful.
Well,
you might remember us for that reason.
Exactly. Sometimes that makes things very memorable. So perhaps then we can assume that you actually weren't that awful and you're just doing yourself down.
Yeah, probably. I don't look back at all those gigs very fondly, unfortunately. But it didn't work out.
What was the name of the band?
We were called the Alaskan Pipeline, and we did acoustic-driven rock, kind of melancholy stuff. So Ben at the Railway put us on with Dive Dive for some reason, who were punk rock.
Yeah.
But anyway, the good old days. I mean,
counter-programming.
Yeah, let's go back a bit, if you don't mind, going back to the early days. And I always like to know or find out a bit about your musical influences. So I'll ask you both individually. Nigel, you can go first. But I mean, in terms of, music and how you grew up with music and your first sort of artists that you got into, what kind of bands were you listening to?
Well, given that we're talking about Unbelievable Truth, this is probably all going to sound a little bit odd because... Andy's a very important part of this story because I first got into music and got passionate about music through my brother's taste in music, essentially, because I've got a brother who's 3.5 years older than me. So the first band I was probably really, it's the first act I was really passionate about. The first single I bought was Adam and the Ants, which, looking back, it was the first album, first kind of album of that lineup, Kings of the Wild Frontier. And sometimes you go back to stuff that you liked when you were a kid and you listen to it later on and go, oh, that stinks. But Kings of the Wild Frontier, I went back to recently and it's much better than I would have had any idea that it was when I was, 11 years old. And then from there, I really loved Marillion and Iron Maiden. They were very early things. Lots of bands here that sound nothing at all like Unbelievable Truth. I really liked In Excess at school. I liked some Level 42. And then I met Andy. I'm not really sure why he liked me, but one of his earliest acts was to give me a C90 with loads of REM on. And that quickly became, I was like, these guys are great. And, Andy introduced me to Pixies and REM and stuff like that. So that's kind of my earliest formative things.
Andy, what about yourself then? In growing up in the York household, what was playing in the radio in the kitchen?
Yeah, I also have a brother who's about 3.5 years older, and which you might know. And so, I was lucky enough because of that to be listening to some really amazing stuff at quite an early age. I particularly remember listening to a lot of David Bowie, Let's Dance, and Hunky Dory, and sort of Joe Jackson, and that kind of thing. And a bit later on, Life's Rich Pageant was the thing that Tom and I first got into on the REM side. I think by the time I met Nigel, REM was a big thing for both of us. And I guess Elvis Costello as well, or maybe that came a little bit later, but certainly was a thing that we both bonded over.
In terms of like finding a voice, writing songs together, how did that come about?
Well, I'm terrible. I never want to interrupt, but podcasts are rubbish. Everyone will be going, no, after you. So I'm just going to talk. Shut up, York. I was kind of, we were in a band at school. This is basically the way we met, is through bands, because I moved to Abingdon when I was 13, and I didn't know anybody, and I was a 13-year-old and very socially awkward. And the way I actually kind of started opening up to people is my parents had a bit of guilt about moving me away from London, where we'd grown up, to this new place and me having no friends. And I parlayed that guilt into them buying me a Porter studio, which was not something that today's kids would recognize, but it's like a little cassette multi-track thing that was all we had to record on back in my day. And I started mentioning this around school, and the manager of a band called the Illiterate Hands at the time, came and said, hello. Actually, his voice was very high. Hello, I understand you've got a means of recording bands. Can you record our band? And so through that, I met Andy and Johnny, who were in the band, and Matt, the other guitarist, and Simon, the bass player, and recorded them. And at the time, they had a drum machine, and I convinced them that they should get a real drummer. So I kind of wheedled my way into the band. But then after school, I was kind of much more driven to be in the band, doing band things. Like straight out of school, I had offers to go to university, but instead I went, you know what, I just want to be in a band. So I joined a band. In fact, I joined about 4 bands, but I was in a band with Jason called Purple Rhinos, and we played a lot for a kind of baby band. And then that split up. And while this was happening, Andy had gone away to Russia. So I'm delving into Andy's story now, but he can give you the juicy details. And then I got a letter from him saying, I've written some songs. Maybe we can get together and play them. I've still got that letter. Is that how you remember it, Andy?
Yeah, I don't think I did a lot of writing with the school band that we were in. I don't remember doing much apart from contributing a whistling solo and in sort of not very good improvised saxophone stuff as well. But yeah, then I went away to live in Russia for a year as part of my degree, and I got a cheap Russian guitar, and I made really good friends with a Russian guy called Mike, and we spent a lot of time just sort of jamming and playing REM covers and that kind of thing. And I think I started to come up with a few ideas during that year. And I was quite excited about that. Yeah, so when we got together after that, Nigel and I, the sort of songwriting dynamic started to establish itself, I guess, which was principally and always has been like, I think it's the fact that I've got quite a good melodic sense and come up with nice melodies, but I'm a little bit musically illiterate in a way. Don't have a great grasp of theory, or I couldn't change a key mid-song to save my life. So Nigel would tend to come up with a lot of the kind of interesting musical structure, I guess. I would contribute the melody, and it's kind of remained that way. I've never really picked up that side of things.
But my feeling about it. Sorry, cutting in on you there, Chris.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Go on.
my feeling about it was, it's kind of exactly as Andy says. Is I'm going to get a bit un-English and over-complimentary, but he's got such a beautiful voice and such an amazing sense of melody that it was perfectly possible for Andy to just play a C chord for 2 minutes and sing over it, and it would sound, amazing. It would sound like a song. But then I would tend to come into it and go, if this is going to be, if it's going to have slightly more to it in the background, perhaps I can take this melody and I can actually shift, we can use more than one chord. And Jace would usually Jace would come up with amazing bass lines and these really, really weird guitar riffs, which would give what we were writing a very distinct flavor always. In terms of writing, it took a little while to really get our groove, but in terms of writing, it's the most perfect creative experience I've ever had. As we were kind of going through the early days, there was a little while where neither me nor Andy were that good at guitar. Jace was good at guitar, but he was great at writing stuff. But in terms of his playing at the time, he wasn't very aggressive. He couldn't bring stuff out of it. So we got a guitarist in who was a really amazing player, a guy called Ken. But we just stopped writing because it just took something out of the chemistry while he was there. And I really remember eventually we realized we weren't writing. So I broke the news to Ken that we were going to go back to being a 3-piece. And we had a rehearsal like the week after that, I think. And just the three of us sat in a rehearsal room. And I think we wrote, it was 3.5 songs basically completely in that one session. We did all of Almost Here. All of Forget About Me. I remember we did that. We did half of a song called Covers that ended up on the second album. And there were 2 others as well. And it was just coming out and we could barely stop it. And it was almost like being part of one person. It was, 3 brains that were just very in tune with each other. I remember that the next band was trying to come in and we were supposed to be leaving, but it was like, sorry, we're just writing something else. Just wait 2 more minutes. So,
yeah.
I mean, I loved it. It was the most satisfying thing I could imagine.
Did it take much in terms of the evolution or finding your signature kind of sound? Or was there lots of reiterations of it? Was there lots of incarnations of it till you kind of settled on the kind of the sound that kind of you're known for?
I can't remember if we discussed this, Andy, but I feel like we did, that we kind of wanted to be a male throwing muses kind of thing. Particularly there was a B-side of one of their singles called Cottonmouth, which had a lot of acoustic guitar in, and we wanted to focus on acoustics. I don't know why, we just did. Maybe that was because it was the only guitars we owned. But that was a particular touchstone. And the first few demos kind of rested on that a bit. And I also had this half idea that I wanted to bring in some prog rock influences. But it was after that we did a few things naturally, and it was like, hang on, this is much better. Let's follow this up. Is that about right, Andy?
Yeah, I don't remember a huge amount of like effort or conscious thought going into kind of crafting a particular sound. It felt like it, at least from where I was sitting, it happened quite naturally. I do remember. I don't remember at what stage this started thinking about it, but we certainly had we had some vague thoughts about wanting to sound like Talk Talk as well. I think certainly by the time we were recording the first album, we were thinking about that, and I think Nigel at the time didn't necessarily know a lot of late Talk, and so was kind of thinking, right, well, I need it to sound like this thing that I don't actually know what it sounds like, but I guess it sounds like this. So there's a bit of that going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Andy was telling me I had to listen to The Colour of Spring, and I kept promising him that I would, and finally got around to it about 3 years ago. So,
well, that whole thing at the time, I remember, I was hugely influenced by your sound, and because I was you were coming out of that, the Britpop era, that big happy clappy. That's not the way to describe it, but it was kind of very bright and colourful. And then we had this, I suppose, kind of an acoustic movement, but you were kind of on the forefront of that. You kind of preceded that acoustic movement, and we were aware of a shifting tide, I guess, in the music or the indie music scene at that time.
No,
am I overthinking it?
Well, I mean, I think you're just giving us much too much credit to have had any idea what was going on. We were just doing our own thing, and it was really instinctive, So, for instance, did you go away a second time, Andy? Because I remember, or possibly you came back for a little while in the middle of your trip to Russia, and we recorded some stuff, and then you went away again. Is it? Because there was a time when you were away, and to pick a song which perhaps is most identifiably us, Solved, I remember the writing off, or certainly the kind of initial writing off very clearly, because Jace was round I was actually still at my dad's house at the time, and he was there. Andy was in another country, and it kind of got to about 11 o'clock, and Jay said, I got to go to work tomorrow, I better go. And we were both holding guitars. And literally, as we were walking from the sofa to the door, Jace just kind of started picking out what turned into the chorus riff. And I kind of played a couple of chords, and we ended up writing the whole thing by the door of the lounge, because we didn't sit back down again, because we thought this was going to take, we thought he was leaving. And we wrote basically the whole thing. I demoed it, sent it to Andy. Andy came back with this amazing melody. And I was like, okay, this is easy.
Lyrically, Andy, what were you drawing upon in terms of the content of the song?
To be honest, the lyrics for the first album and all those songs, they were stream of consciousness lyrics to begin with, and then I would just kind of, once that started to take shape, I would play around with it and try and make it make some kind of sense, but not too much sense. So that was kind of as far as I was thinking it through. I didn't consciously kind of sit down and go, right, I will now write some lyrics, and it's got to be about something, until the second album. And I found that process really hard, really, really difficult. It was much easier to just come up with some nonsense and then kind of work on it until it took some sort of shape.
Mm.
But I love that. In terms of the lyrics, I was just a listener because I never had any input on that side of what was happening. And I think, yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a very REM thing that you throw something out there. It's impressionistic, essentially. You put some words out there and people, but you craft them in such a way that it's possible to then imprint an experience or an emotion, that the listener is having onto those lyrics. And, I loved it. It wasn't like I was thinking, well, this has to be about politics or something. It was like, no, this could be about what's in, it's those kind of lyrics that almost bypass the intellect in some ways and just go straight to the heart, which is always what I'm looking for.
Yeah, and it felt, just drawing on my own experience about listening to you guys, it felt really grown up as well. It felt like there was a definite, transition from being just a music lover to like a musician, and then listening to the craft that what you were doing, and it feeling very grown up. I don't know. There was definitely a difference in terms of, I think, what you were doing, for me anyway. I don't know. That's not a question. That's just me saying something. Anyway, talk about in terms of getting signed and things. I know because you were signed the Oxford label with the Shifty Disco, and for the first single. Is that right? And how did that come around?
Andy, it's every time you ask a question, because there's a slight delay on your thing, I always end up answering. So I'm just going to shut up this time and let
I want you
to
answer this one because it's about stuff that happened and what
details.
Happened. I don't remember any of it.
Well, I mean, our way of getting signed was actually kind of complicated. So, in terms of when we're talking about, I got the letter from Andy about writing some songs. I got that in 93 and we started demoing in 94. And Jason and Andy and me actually moved in together in 94, in a house called, in a town called Didcot. And there was a lot of work done then. And, we wrote Higher Than Reason in the living room there, and we already had Finest Little Space and Solved going. And then in May 1995, I got a call from Andy, and we went out for a walk in Oxford. By this time, he'd moved out and he was actually living with my brother, I think. And we went for a walk in Oxford, and he said, I'm not feeling, we got to the point. So again, I missed out an important fact. So we had these songs, and I still thought we were a baby band and just trying to figuring out what we were doing. So I just kind of gathered up what we were doing without any intention, and sent a few tapes out to people and said, what do you think of this? How are we doing? And immediately we got people going, this is great. And there was the managers, it was Radiohead's managers who I actually knew through I did lights for Radiohead in the early days for the Pablo Honey tour. So I knew them through that, and they were like, this is great. We want to do something with this. So early 95, we had an offer of a publishing deal, which was not huge, but it would have kind of given us studio time. It would have given us money to be able to concentrate on it and kind of make an album, and would have been the kind of first stepping stone. I think it was the week before we were due to sign. Andy said, come over to Oxford, and we went for a walk, and he said, I'm not feeling so sure about doing this, band thing. And I wanted to accommodate him because we've been very close friends. So I said, what is it about being in a band that is feeling uncomfortable? And he said, recording, playing live, making videos, and doing interviews. And I kind of went, well, all right, that doesn't give us much leeway for maneuver there. So Andy actually left at that point, and I had to go and tell the managers and told Jace. So yeah, that was middle of 95. And then Andy went back to Russia This was after his after talking about him in the third person. Well, he sits there nodding. Podcast listeners, he's nodding. He's telling me that this is correct. He went back to Moscow, working for Greenpeace. This was after he'd finished his degree now. And then when he came back with, he was going to do a master's at Oxford in Russian politics, I think. And when he came back, he had like a few months before he was going to move in to Oxford and start the masters. And he didn't have anywhere to go particularly, and didn't want to go back to his folks' house. So I said, "You can move in with me, until you're ready." And nefariously, I was upstairs playing all the demos we'd done previously very loud. And in a very English way, Andy was downstairs with an acoustic guitar playing a bunch of new songs that he'd written while he'd been away, but without either of us talking to each other. And eventually I said, "Why don't we try this again?" I think, but you were very conflicted about it, weren't you, Andy? It took a while for you to decide whether you're going to do the masters or whether you're going to be in a band, as I recall.
Honestly, I don't remember that too much, but I do remember that period of starting to talk to the labels and going on the dole basically for a while. Because by that time it was looking like, well, something's going to happen. We're going to get some sort of record deal. But in terms of being conflicted, I don't really remember that too well. Except that those thoughts of not quite feeling like this is really 100% me never really completely left me. But I think Nigel's list that he provided earlier, a few of those things, like I ended up being fine with, or even really happy with, like the actual recording and writing process was. Ended up being the reason to do it, the thing that made it all worthwhile, and particularly the writing and the recording of Almost Here. That was all just like an amazing trip, really. But all the other things that one is expected to do as part of being in a band, like making videos and doing TV interviews. Things like that, I was never really comfortable with. So yeah, if I was ever going to do it again, which is looking unlikely, I think I would try and I'd do something that kind of allowed me to stay in the background more. I think because obviously in the sort of singer-songwriter or indie guitar kind of milieu, it's really hard to do that, right? It's really hard to just kind of go, we're not going to talk about who we are at all. We're just going to be anonymous musicians. You can do that in electronic music or something, but it's not an option.
Yeah, and I was a bit happier to talk to people, but certainly it wasn't fantastic for my self-esteem when I'd get carted into do an interview, and you could tell that they were a little bit crestfallen that they were talking to the drummer. But so after Andy decided that he wanted to be in a band again, the weird thing was the fact that we'd got literally to the day before pretty much of signing this publishing deal meant that there was a story about us in the industry. So when we reappeared, people were like, "Oh, it's those guys. They're back again. I'll give this a listen." We had different managers, but quite quickly MCA and Virgin were wanting to sign us. And so we signed with Virgin, but we said to them, "Can we actually just delay signing for 2 months? Because this local label of guys we know called Shifty Disco are doing the Singles Club, and we'd like our first release to be with them." So they delayed it long enough that we put out the demo of Building on Shifty Disco, and then sold our souls to our corporate overlords.
I was going to ask about the signing. You said, selling your soul to a major label, but what was it? Was it conflict? you were quite conflicted potentially about that and wanting control? I mean, I hear lots of horror stories about it being a poison chalice, that kind of deal. I mean, what was it like for you? Did you have control, or did they give you a good time? What was it like?
As far as I'm aware, I mean, for the first album, we had possibly the easiest, most blissful experience that I think it's possible to have with a major label. I mean, I was never against major labels empirically in any way, anyway. Just because they're a tool, they're a company, and as long as you're trying to hang on to your integrity. But it wasn't quite what I was expecting. I was expecting, imposition and control and stuff like that. But it just seemed to go our way. So, for instance, we were looking for producers to do the first album, and we interviewed a bunch of people, and nobody seemed quite right. And then the A&R guy said to me, "Why don't you do it? You did the demos; they sound right. We'll get somebody in to co-produce with you, just to see it through. But you should do it." I was like, "All right." And then, he came to the studio like midway through, and we were expecting him to come in and go, "There's no singles. We need Park Life or something." But he just sat there, listened to everything, and said, "It's all fantastic. We'll pick a single once you're done," and then pissed off again. And that was it. As I remember it. Is that how it went down?
Not quite, because he said, "That fantastic. Anyone up for a game of table tennis?" And then after that, he left.
Yeah. So for that first album, it was easy. Sorry to everybody who's had a terrible time with major labels who's hearing that going, "What, you bastards!" But they just left us to it, and we seemed to make a great album.
It was quite, I think I seem to remember it was quite a low key to start with. We sort of released the Stone EP, and it was all a bit like, there's not much being put behind this. But then, like at some point, they kind of decided, actually, this album could really do something, and they did throw quite a lot of money at it without kind of seizing control of what we were doing. Really, they still kind of cut us quite a lot of slack to just be who we were.
Does anything promo-wise stick out for you guys? I mean, I remember seeing you on later with Jules Holland, but would that have been a highlight?
Yeah. I mean, I remember things that were that weren't so high profile, but we did a absolutely insane local radio tour, which I think, I mean, it was only maybe 6 days or something in a guy's car, but we just went everywhere, and we seemed to be doing 3, 4, 5 local stations a day, and we went from the very north of Scotland all the way down. We drove so far, and I had no idea where we were, and we were just kind of walking into a place, and the guy would go, "Hey," and then we'd play Stone, and then he'd go, "Hey," and then we'd leave and go to York and do exactly the same thing. And I mean, I like that kind of stuff, because I like the feeling like you were doing some hard work aspect of it. I'm not sure everybody else felt like that. But Andy?
No, not really. French TV though, that was good, wasn't it? Didn't we do some amazing live TV thing?
Yeah. I mean, because France got on board quite early, and so we did a couple of times going on a show called Nulle Part Ailleurs, which where we only played a song. We did Solved on it, and then we went back and did Settle Down later on, and we did a thing called the Black Session, which was like a whole gig. The one I remember most, actually, kind of on that same promo tour, was there was a radio gig, and that we knew it was going to be, a full show essentially. But we arrived, and I think it was about an hour before it was due to start. Some guy said, "Okay, you're going to be playing for an hour and a half." Yes. And it was our first album. We even if we stretched it out, we had a maximum of an hour and 15 minutes, and we were like, "Oh God!" And I think we did like a couple of covers, and we were learning them, 10 minutes before we were about to go on live radio, national radio in France. Ah! But I mean, I like that kind of thing. I think that was the first time we covered a Mark Mulcahy song as well.
In terms of festivals and things and live following, did you establish a live following quite early on, or how did that work?
I mean, we went out and played. We weren't like Black Flag by any means, but we went out and played a lot. And I remember like the Higher Than Reason tour was the moment I think everybody went, holy shit, something's happening, because the first show on that tour. So we toured around Stone and were playing to very few people. We never got support slots really. But the first show of the Higher Than Reason tour was at Cambridge at a place called the Boat Race, and it was absolutely rammed. And we're like, what the fuck's going on here? And there were people queuing around the block outside. And that whole tour was really exciting. But I mean, one of my happiest Unbelievable Truth memories is a French festival called Route du Rock, where the slot we were in, we probably weren't quite big enough for, but we found out that Portishead were headlining, and they wanted somebody a bit quieter as a buffer before them, so it wasn't like rock, 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 Portishead. So instead they went rock, 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 Unbelievable Truth, Portishead. So we were like second to headline, and we really pulled it off, and there were a lot of people watching us, and I loved playing live with the band, because when we really got it right, it was more like magic than music. It was this kind of atmosphere in the air. Andy's voice amplified is just like, that's the kind of thing that you could imagine would be a religious experience. It always was for me. And when that kind of thing really happened, like it did that night, it was like, oof. So does that answer your question? Probably not, but
no, it was good. It was a good answer. Yeah, I don't know really what I was asking, to be honest. I still can't get this right. Andy, would you say that was right in terms of like festival shows and things? What was your kind of favorite kind of gig to play?
A lot of the festival. You asked me about festivals, and I think about Glastonbury, 1998 or 9, which was awful in every way for us, because I think we were always second on the bill to Jesus and Mary Chain not on the main stage, obviously, and just everything was running really late. So by the time it was our turn to go on, they were like, right, you're doing 3 songs and then you're off, kind of thing, which was not good, and it was just incredibly muddy and horrible. But I totally agree. Route du Rock was a wonderful experience. But I guess not surprisingly, given our kind of music, the times when it really clicked tended to be more intimate shows. It's true. Like sometimes it would just come together and be something special, and it's kind of hard to exactly pinpoint what had to be in place and right for that to happen.
I mean, I could imagine it being equally as impressive either side. I mean, unfortunately, I never got to see you guys play live, but the whole, your music is, accessible in that small, intimate venue, but also anthemic in ways as well to reach a bigger audience if it needs to be. You're the best of both worlds.
Thanks, mate.
Whoa. So you had the second album, and then you had a collection of miscellaneous. Well, it's called Bisque Music in 2001. And what was the idea behind that double album? I mean, obviously, it was just literally to sort of cathartic in a way to get everything together and release the unreleased and the hidden tracks.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly that. So it came out after we'd broken up. Certainly mentally for me, I've always had a bit of a downer on the second album. I produced it as well, even though I didn't want to. I didn't feel prepared, and I wasn't in the best mental health space to do it. And it made, to me, that album feels a little bit kind of paranoid and twitchy, and we didn't manage to tap the world of beauty. But having said that, we were very prolific, because I listened to Miss Music a little while ago, having not heard it for ages. And, it's 22 years have gone by, so I'm not too embarrassed about bigging myself up. But listening to that, which was a bunch of B-sides and unreleased songs, it was like, this is better than quite a lot of albums that I hear, and this was stuff that wasn't good enough to go on Sorry Thank You. And it was all written in that period. We wrote a lot of things. In fact, I think there's some songs on that album which probably should have been on Sorry Thank You. But yeah, it was, from my point of view, and it's going to be very different for Andy, I'm sure. I just wanted to kind of close the door on it and try and figure out what was going to be next, now that chapter had ended. So I kind of put that whole thing together and put it out, and basically, independently, without a label, and then forgot about it.
Yeah, it's got some interesting bits on it, but I think my general feeling is that it's better to. I think when I listen to, let me put it this way: when I listen to other bands, I get a bit put off by the less good stuff, and I find myself like filtering out the stuff that I don't like. And then I did that with Elliott Smith, for example. And once I weeded out stuff that actually isn't that great, what was left, I just fell more and more in love with, because I was only listening to the stuff that really soars. So that's kind of, I have a slightly different philosophy on it, I think, from Nigel.
Do you listen back to stuff to it at all then, Andrew, or are you, or your solo albums as well? I mean, how in touch with you with that part of your musical career still?
Do I listen to it? I listen to bits. I listen to the bits that I think still, really transcended a bit and have really kind of lasting value. I think is most of Almost Here, except I think some of it I've just listened to many times now, or rather just played it so many times that I don't really feel any great desire to go back and listen to it again. But I mean, I think almost all of that album is amazing, but best of all is the song that didn't make it onto the album, From This Height, which is probably the song I'm most proud of from the whole Unbelievable Truth thing. And we never brought it out properly except in Japan, which was kind of random. And so thank you. I don't really go back to that. I think there are a few songs that are good, but the atmosphere of it, I don't think it's so much Nigel's production that makes it feel kind of uncomfortable listening. It's just where we all were at the time, including me, and trying to write these lyrics from a different with a different agenda. Like, I've got to make this about something that was hard. I just, it's too tied up for me I remember what it was like when we were making it. And in retrospect, I just wish we'd slowed down a bit and just kind of gone, right, these are interesting ideas. But let's keep writing. Let's go back to how that was when we were all in a house in Didcot together and just writing all the time, trying to recapture that. That's, in retrospect, what I think we should have done.
Is there any plans, guys, to sort of do anything with like re-releasing or remastering or vinyl? Because that is taking off big time. Would you ever consider doing that?
Well, I mean, we don't own any of the Almost Here stuff because that's all with Virgin. Sorry, Thank You, we kind of own, but I don't have any of the masters for, and I mean, there's some background corporate shenanigans going on with that, which I could sort out, but it just takes more effort than I've got. I mean, I'm more interested in, musically speaking, we've played little bits over the years. We played just over a year ago. We did a gig for my 50th, and just me and a few friends in a pub in Oxford, a place that was kind of special to us that we played lots of times. And when I asked, I thought Andy would be kind of dubious about the whole thing. I thought he'd be doing me a favor, and he was like, "Yeah, great. Can we do From This Height?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure we can." And that was really fun. I think if we were to make another record, it would have to be once we got into the Guinness Book of Records for the longest gap between album 2 and album 3 for any band ever.
I think you're teasing you're teasing something. I mean, I might be reading too much into it, but I reckon you guys are you've been secretly recording for the last 2 or 3 years, and you've got an album coming out next year. That's what you're sort of subliminally telling me there.
Well, you can believe that if you'd like, because I'm never one to take away somebody's dreams.
Oh, I could dream, Archie. I'll just keep dreaming. Yeah, well, I mean, it could happen though, couldn't it? I mean, you never say never.
Yeah, I never say never. Do you ever say never, Andy?
Sometimes I say never, but to that idea, I'm not going to say never.
Oh, there's a string of hope there, guys. I'm going to let you go. I've had you for an hour, and I think I don't want to keep you for too long, but longer. I've really, really enjoyed our chat, and the deep dive into one of my favorite bands ever, Unbelievable Truth. So it's been an absolute pleasure listening to you guys talk about it and going in depth in some of the recording and the writing of it all. So thank you so much. And maybe next episode I'll get you back on to talk about all the solo projects and things as well. That's another hour, I think, or two.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I mean, there's some things even in our career that we skated over.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm happy for another one.
We'll go part
ready.
2.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly you've probably noticed that I can just blab on incontinently for England. So whereas Andy waits until there's something intelligent to say and says that, we're kind of a good tag team in that way.
It's podcast gold, guys.
Podcast gold. And when Jace was involved in interviews, at the end of me blabbing on incontinently and Andy saying intelligent things, Jace would go, "Yep," and that would be his contribution.
Well, again, thanks again, guys.
Total pleasure, and lovely to hang out with you as well, Andy. It's always lovely to see you.
You too.
All right.
Bye.
Take
Bye,
care.
everybody.
Take care.
Bye.